Chat. Okay. All right. Thanks for coming to our session today, AI for the new year, and thinking about ways to further integrate AI into your academic work. And so we're going to have a whole range of AI backgrounds and experience types in our session here today, I'm sure. And so we're going to cover some things that are somewhat simple to more advanced, and we'll talk about those along the way. There's also space for you to kind of steer where we go with some of the examples, particularly toward the end. We'll have some open space and we'll gather some votes and recommendations for what you'd like to see. And throughout, please feel free to use the chat. Try and make sure that you have the chat set to everyone when you want it to go across the group. And we really encourage that because we want this to be about a community of sharing. Of course, there's a prepared presentation, but we want there to be dialogue across the group. And we find that with these large sessions, there is just so much knowledge and experience that's shared through this chat that we've actually been able to collate, go through, and create resources out of the chat. And so we will be sharing after the session, we'll be sharing the recording, link to the slides, and then the collated chat and the resources that were shared through the session and by participants as well. So feel free to sit back and know that you don't have to copy anything down. And some of these things will move quickly, but let me jump into, well, let me back up a little bit and just introduce myself. For those that don't know me, I'm Brett Christie, and I'm VP for Educational Innovation and Inclusivity at Alchemy. I've been in this position for 3.5 years now, and before that, 25 years in higher education as faculty and faculty developer at the campus and system levels. And I've been on this year-long ride with AI so far, and have been finding some really exciting possibilities, and always look forward to sharing that with you. And then also sharing times where we find that, well, this isn't quite working right, or, well, you're going to need to do it this way, or we'll wait and see on these things. So we'll have those conversations as well as we go along. All right. If you're not aware, we've had this series on AI going on, AI in education, since May. And so we've got, I think, about 9 sessions, and we've got one more planned for February already that I'll share at the end for you. All the ones that are listed in blue there are past sessions. And at the end, I'll give you a link to where you can find those, because you would be able to find the recording and, again, the resources that we've gathered around those and the slides as well. And then you can see where we are on today's. Okay, so let's jump forward and start getting into the session here. So we're going to look at exploring many creative applications in education. I'll do some hands-on demonstrating. I'll do a mixture of showing you what I've done and also do some demonstrating live, and also maybe taking some requests later, as much as I can do that on the fly. Some of it's easy to do, and I can do that. Some things will be more complex, need a little bit more thinking time before going into, so we'll just wait and see. Hopefully inspire you on your course design and delivery process, and then any collaborative learning and discussion that we can engage in. We'll have a Padlet later where we can get some of that, and then talking about future trends and opportunities, because as you know, with AI, it's almost a daily change in what's available, what's happening, what's coming, and all of that. So some of that will come up today. Okay. What we did, as you may recall, as you registered, we just asked you a couple quick questions. One was, what's something that you would like to see demonstrated? And so I took all of that and analyzed it. There are a few hundred responses, and then came up with these main categories. And these don't reside just in one category. Some of them reside across categories. If you're talking about, you know, a lesson, that's going to have active learning, it's going to have content, all of those things. So I'm not going to stay in 4 or 5 boxes. I'm going to kind of go across them. But if you look on the black text, those are some of the things that I'll be demonstrating there. If I don't demonstrate them, then I've got links to some ChatGPT logs where you can see how they've been done. So there's not time to do everything that's on here, because it's quite detailed and there's a lot. And some of these are big, deep tasks. Okay, so those are the types of things that we'll look at today. As far as prompt engineering and effective use, that I'm simply going to address at the outset and then try and model along the way. So we're not going to spend a lot of time within that one. As far as ethical use and understanding of capabilities, that'll come up a little bit, but it's going to be mostly the 3 more constructive tasks that we'll focus on today, or categories. Okay, so let's talk about the basics of using ChatGPT and our approach here for this session. So again, some of you may have heard this term through me before and through others in Alchemy, is ChatGPT or AI as your creative companion. So don't think about it as this fixed box that you're just going to try and command something out of, but think about it rather than fixed knowledge or fixed box, think about it as something that can work with you to play these different roles and do these different tasks. And you can see there are quite many possibilities up here and probably others that you can think of and others that some of you have done before. But it can be from simply creating an outline for you or getting you started on a writing task to completely rethinking something and putting it into a different format, adapting it for different levels, going through role player personas and things like that, creating visuals, and I'll do a little bit of that today. So think as broadly and diverse as you can with AI as your creative companion. And that term I also use because I try to speak to it, not just put in these flat commands. I try and have a dialogue as I'm working with ChatGPT, and you'll see that through some of my prompts here and why I use those strategies. As far as prompts, there are some models out there that are as long as, 8-character acronyms that are probably good for beginners who want to make sure that they cover all 8 of those things. What I've done is I've really streamlined that down to these 4, where if you think of the role that you want ChatGPT to play and you let it know through a statement, I want you to play the role, or you are an expert in such and such, then that's setting it up to start having a mindset for where you're wanting it to operate, and then give it the task. And then what are the requirements or the parameters for the task, what you want it to include, the length, the format, those types of things, maybe some things you don't want. And then what's the output type? What format should it be in? Primarily, these tend to be in text, but more and more you can start asking for things like images, visual diagrams, slide decks, even videos with some other apps. So we'll talk about some of those things. And then sort of between these columns or between the lines, start thinking about little nuances you can put in related to, let's say, learning science. So I'll be bringing that up a few times today. Where with any of your knowledge about learning science can you put in some critical elements to really steer it to the best quality for what your desired outcome is? I always add personal touches. Some of you may know that about me. Again, you can really prop it up to do things well. Encourage it. I just feel like if you can talk positive and be asset-based, that's always a good thing. Occasionally, you'll have to tell it, take a moment to think it over. And there's actually data that shows if you give it commands like, take your time and get this right, then it will actually give you better output. So that's always a good thing to think about as well. So this is a good streamlined guideline that I think anybody can easily follow, and then think about some of the nuances in between as they get more comfortable. Okay, so let's jump into the first section and talk about curriculum and academic planning. So you're going into your course, whether it's design or redesign or doing some sort of revitalization of your course, tweaking and improving certain elements. This is where you can think about ChatGPT for different things. So let's say it's just for a particular lesson plan. So this is for Introduction to Sociology. We're focusing on Chapter 6, Groups and Organization. I want you to help me create an in-person class lesson, and I'll show different class modalities or formats. This is a 1-hour class meeting and assumes that students have read the chapter. That's a big one, I know, but that's how you want to prepare it, because you want them to come in with the context and having done a certain amount of work. There's 40 of the students. Create a lesson to engage students around the main elements of the chapter. As you develop the lesson, make sure to use Gagne's 9 events of instruction, because that way you're going to get it to be very structured and targeted. And that's a pretty well-known model of creating events of instruction or lesson plans. I find in higher ed, people don't say lesson plans as much. They might say class session, whatever you're comfortable with. I'd like you to include a brief anonymous poll, using poll everywhere, 5 multiple choice true false questions, bring in a TED Talk video that I can show for part of the lesson. I'll want name of the activity instructor. So I won't read the whole thing to you, but what we'll do is we'll go to the chat log here, and you'll see that I have the in-person version, but I've also said, you know what? I have a different section for this course that I also teach that's high flex. Let me know how I can adapt this to a high flex format. And some of you did request that in the pre-poll for this session. Let me expand that. Hopefully you're seeing that. I think that's pretty good size text. So there's the prompt you saw on the screen earlier. I have it in the slide. I know that's redundant, but that way you've got it in multiple places. So here's ChatGPT responding back to me. It's kind of parroting in that first block of text. That's fine. Now here are Gagne's 9 events. The first one is, how do you gain attention? So you can start with an intriguing question or statement related to the chapter's theme. This could be a quick write or something like that to get students going. It could be an icebreaker. Be careful, icebreakers are sometimes effective. Sometimes, students kind of roll their eyes at them. Informing learners of their objectives, stimulating recall of prior learning. So presenting the content. So here was that TED Talk brought in. It found a TED Talk for me. The reason I use TED Talks is they're high quality. They're usually engaging and interesting. They're usually at around that 10-minute length, which is about the attention span that research shows before things really drop off. They're captioned, and often they include instructional resources that you would be able to adopt from TED Ed. So multiple reasons for something like a TED Talk. Providing learning guidance and then eliciting performance from students. So there's a poll opportunity, but I also want them engaged in a group role play exercise, which is coming up on number 8. Okay, so that's a scan of that 60-minute lesson that I had it help me prepare, but I didn't ask it for the learning outcomes. It just stated, cover the learning outcomes, but it didn't give them to me. So then I did a follow-up prompt. It gave me a lot of detail. What I would do for these learning outcomes, I would just skim the bold text and prop up those 6 learning outcomes to show students those as we lead into the session. And then I could have them focus on those as they're going through the group activity and identify where they've met those outcomes or address those outcomes by giving an example or making a statement. So those are ways you can use ChatGPT to start forming a lot of information for your lesson, and then you can start shaping that out. Okay, and I've given it more feedback, and this is where I've said, I'm also teaching a section of this in HyFlex. So help me adopt this to where I've got some students in person, some students online. How can I leverage technology and the different settings together? So some of the same information, but it's starting to target things a little bit more specifically, saying, oh, well, here's how you could use chat to have students from both groups communicating, or here's how you could use breakout rooms for this part of the lesson. Obviously, you can stream the TED Talk video to both groups simultaneously. I see a copyright issue, uploading a book chapter from a course text. Yeah, we're really leaning into OER texts and chapters and focusing on those, for example, and today we'll talk about that. And sorry if I do miss chat comments, there's a lot of you, but I'll try and get to them as I can. We're using OpenStax quite a bit and finding a lot of success with that, and we'll demonstrate a little bit of that or talk about that in our platform. Okay. So let me go back to the slide here. That gives you a sense for a lesson plan and how you might prop that up. And this is where you can take this prompt and start to put in your different elements and replace some bits on here and kind of shape this your direction or your way. I've tried to kind of make it sort of centrally generic. These are other elements of this section that are related that I've covered in prior sessions or that others have covered with me in prior webinars that we've done. So if you're looking at your course description, how to take it from what's in the catalog to being something that's much more interesting and engaging and will get students excited coming into the course. Creating a welcome message, including the text that you can have for students in a welcome message email, let's say, or it can even give you a great video script where you can put that into a 1-minute welcome video. Improving learning outcome statements. That came up several times in the pre-poll. Let me put chat back up here so I can see if any of these jump out to people where you really want me to jump to these. I'm trying not to retread from prior sessions, but we do get a couple hundred new people every webinar. And again, if I'm teaching something, I don't just cover it once. I tend to cover it again and might cover it differently the second time. So I'm certainly comfortable going back to any of these. Okay. If you're thinking about learning outcomes, not only making sure that those are smart, but they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, that's how you can guide ChatGPT by telling it you want those factors accounted in for learning outcomes. Then you can get those really strong statements that are good for creating transparency of expectations between you and the students, and then aligning your assessments to those. And that's another thing that ChatGPT does well, is if you give it an outcome or a set of outcomes, you can ask it to create activities or assignments aligned specifically to those. So it does that outcomes to assessment alignment mapping really well, which is a complex task and takes time. And I know a lot of instructors don't really get to that stage because of the amount of time that it takes and the deep thinking and expertise related to assessment to get all of that lined up. Okay. Assessing levels of blooms, you can have it analyze your learning outcome statements, and it will report back to you at what different levels of blooms those statements are. And you can look for balance and see if that's appropriate to your level of course. You may want it to be more at the lower levels because maybe it is an introductory course, or maybe over the weeks of the course, you do want it to progress from base understanding to more applied and creative. So you can reflect on that, and it does a good job of analyzing them and tagging them for you. I'll go to probably this next one here because it contains multiple things. It's a pretty deep example. So this is one where I've said I'm teaching a 14-week college level intro to psych course. I'm using a learning management system, Canvas. I can be specific if I want to. I have an online module for each week, so it knows, okay, 14 modules. I want it to suggest an outline for that course. So here, in a matter of seconds, it's suggested the 14-week outline, and it's given me those module level learning outcomes, which is another thing that instructors don't always get to, is that level of module learning outcomes and that very granular level of, okay, intro to psych or research methods. These are the outcomes we're focusing on here in this particular module. So that gives you sense of purpose and your students sense of purpose, and you can go deeper into your planning. It helps you to select the right resources and learning activities and quizzes or other assessments. So quick scan there of all of that it created. And then what I did was I said, okay, great, with those 14, let's focus on, and let me go ahead and jump to ChatGPT Live. And let me find the 14-week outline example. I'm going to close this sidebar just to give us a little bit more room. And I'm going to back up to where we were. And I've told it, okay, I want to focus on chapter 5, sensation and perception. And I've prompted it to go ahead and create a module. And in that module, obviously the chapter is there, but I also want a video. I also want a research article, and I want some sort of activity, and I want a quiz. And so through this chat log, you would be able to go through and see the different things that it's developed here in finding a research article, in finding a video, an asynchronous online activity where they've gone into a discussion, they've explored virtual reality related to sensation and perception, and then they'll do a reflection and they post that into a flip. I didn't want to do a discussion or threaded discussion just within the LMS. I wanted to do something a little bit different and multimodal, so we did a flip discussion. And then here it comes up with the quiz and puts in the answers for me there. I'll talk about quiz development a little bit later more specifically, and answer keys and integration into the LMS and things like that. But here's just how deep you can go with it, where I also asked it to create this module overview statement for students, and it threw in the icons. It gave it great language to motivate students, kind of asking them questions as well to get them thinking. Okay, it created the images even. This is involving ChatGPT 4 or Plus and using DALL-E 3 to create the images. So if you have Plus, you're going to be able to do more for that $20 a month, and we can always talk about that later if you want to. So you can start with that 14-week, this is the course prompt, have it lay out all the modules. You can adjust those by title. You can have it create the module outcomes. You can then deep or dive into each of the modules that you want to start creating and have it start creating all of those elements, and you can work with it to get the exact results that you want. Because it won't happen perfectly the first time, but you will get about 80 to 90% of what you're wanting done pretty quickly. You can then adjust and adapt from there using your expertise and aligning to your outcomes. Okay, so that is the chat logs. I see a question about how to access the chat logs. So we're not going to be putting all of these into the chat in Zoom, because that would be a lot and people would be going all over the place. You're going to get access to all of the slides, and they're linked in here. And that's an important question, and I'll just talk about it real quick, is when you're in live chat GPT, which is what I'm at right now, is you're going to have this sidebar of all these conversations that I've had before, all the prompting I've done, and all these examples that have propped up. You're going to have the specific conversation that I'm looking at in the main window. But whenever I want to share it with somebody externally, I can copy over here. I can use this share icon, and I can select the copy. Now, this one's not going to because it has images in it, and it's not wanting to share chat logs that have images. That's a limitation that they're putting on right now, because once you start creating images and putting those out there, there's copyright, and also making sure that images are appropriate. So there's a little bit of guardrail on that. But this is where you can grab a chat log link and then be able to share it with someone else and say, look what I created. And that's what these are over here. These are chat logs. These are not live. You're just seeing the canned conversation that I've propped up. So you'll be able to go through all of those as you access the slides. And we typically get all of this sent out by Monday. You'll have access to all of that. Okay, so let me go back into a little bit more instructional materials and application and teaching. Okay, here's a very concise prompt. You're a very accomplished teacher, so I'm giving it context. I'm propping it up for that of the college course, and this is where you'd be able to paste in like Mad Lib, put in the name of your course. You're excellent at coming up with creative, engaging learning activities that are inclusive and motivating. See, I'm putting in those terms because I want it to think, make it engaging, think about inclusivity. How do you motivate students? So put in those keywords to try and get that kind of juiced up a little bit. And then provide 5 of your best ideas for an engaging learning activity focused on, and then you would put in whatever the key concept is. So this is an example, and again, this is where we'll go to a chat log. This is canned, this is done prior, where we'll look at a Marketing 100 activity example where I thought it did a really good job of creating quality content pretty quickly. So here's that prompt with the context of Marketing 100 put in there, but otherwise same as you saw it on the slide. And then now here's ChatGPT responding. It's saying, okay, here are 5 potential activities that you can do. And then I scanned these and I decided I want to focus on number 3, brand revitalization project. I think that would be intriguing for my students, and there's a lot of value in that, and there are a lot of components that I can require as they go through that process. So I replied, very intriguing examples. I'm most curious about trying that brand revitalization project. The project to be completed in groups of 4, create a student-focused assignment description, a few assignment objectives, guidance for what they should include in the project, how to divvy up the workload into specific project roles per student in their group, and what an effective presentation they work on. So that's just a few sentences, but that really sets up a lot, as you'll see here, to be completed that would take instructors a really long time to do and to do well. And this gets at it pretty effectively. The assignment objectives are there, the project components that they're to focus on, the workload distribution, meaning the roles that the 4 individuals will play, the presentation guidelines, the evaluation criteria for the presentation. Now, I even went deeper, and I think for time purposes and the fact that I've used this a little bit in the past, I even went deeper with this and said, okay, now create a presentation rubric, an assignment rubric. Okay, now for the presentations, create a peer review form so they can get some peer feedback, because I like to try and involve students in giving peer review because it gets them more engaged as participants watching each other present and then giving feedback. So they're not going to just get my feedback, but they're going to get feedback from their peers. And it involves that higher level of thinking when you've got to give peer review. So that's another example of how you can push that further. But I think for time purposes, I probably won't go to that extension task on this one. I see Copilot mentioned. I'm going to bring that up as well. That's an exciting development that's come up in the last couple of days. Okay. So let's go forward a little bit. This is now for creating active learning. This is one of those Mad Lib type prompts that I propped up for you in bold in brackets, where you can see you can put in your context. And then you'll be able to take this prompt and get the results that I can share with you. So I'm going to take from here, from this prompt that you could use to create as your own, I'm going to show you one that I've actually fed in the information. So this activity is going to be a peer collaboration. It's going to be in an online synchronous setting using Zoom. It's to be based on sensation and perception, enable students to demonstrate an understanding of how sensory information is perceived. Breakout rooms of 4, 20 minutes. Okay, so that's all of the information in context. There's a fair amount here, and again, my prompts tend to be on the longer side because I want a lot of good quality output from ChatGPT as quickly as possible, and so I found these to be effective parameters to make sure and include upfront the first time if possible, and then maybe do subtle changes from there through the conversation. Okay. Some people have heard the garbage in, garbage out, so I believe that taking time to really craft these well and then be able to repurpose them and reuse them really pays off. So if we want, we can go to the chat log here and look at another example. So again, I'm saying you're an expert in creating effective active learning exercises, so I want it to really thinking within that context. And then that's the rest of the prompt that you saw earlier. So here it's telling me how to prepare for the activity. Now, if I'm an experienced instructor and experienced in teaching this course, a lot of these things in 1 through 6, I can scan pretty quickly. I can take them for granted. But just in case, if I'm newer to the course, to teaching, or teaching in a certain modality, it's reminding me of some things that I should keep in mind as I'm preparing. A brief description that I can give for students either in Canvas via an announcement or in the module. And then here's the worksheet structure for this activity. Okay, it's giving some instructions, some questions for them to think about as they're in their breakout. It's given me a download link for the worksheet. I find that sometimes these worksheet downloadable documents are better formatted than other times, so I'm still figuring out the exact nuances there and seeing if we can do it more consistently. So it can produce some of these materials for you as well with GPT plus. Okay. Exactly, yeah, as stated in the chat, and plus is where you're going to be able to get visuals and downloadables and things like that. And we'll talk about plugins briefly, but that's kind of heading into a broader realm. And we'll talk about other apps as well that are complementary to ChatGPT that allow you to do video and multimedia. Okay, so let's go back to our slide example here. So that's an example for creating some active learning. In all the research that I've looked at for many years, no matter how highly a course is rated by students, the one thing they're always asking for is more engagement, more active learning. So it's always something that can be improved, and for some courses can be greatly improved. So ChatGPT can assist with that. Okay, other elements of this section covered in prior sessions. So I know Zach Justice is on here, and he did a couple tests with gamma.app and had created slide sets related to Electoral College. You heard me mention sensation and perception earlier, so I've done one related to that. But let me just jump to and explain real quick. So if you wanted to, you could go to gamma.app and you'd be able to create a free account and start trying this, but then you would need to pay to be able to create more slide sets. Now, Copilot has come up. I'll get to that in a moment here. But with gamma.app, you can simply put in the topic if you want to as a prompt. You can tell it the topic. You can tell it maybe the length of the session. You can give it some parameters, but you can put a simple prompt into Gamma, and then you can have it create this slide set. And this takes a matter of just moments for it to be able to create it. You can also set parameters of, wordiness versus visuals and kind of keep that in check as well. You can select design templates, or you can have it select. It'll bring in images, and you can also swap those out if you wanted to. Okay, so here's just a quick look at one example. And then there are a couple others linked here as well. Yeah, you can also consider using Canva. That's different than Canvas for those that aren't familiar. Canva is a great resource development platform that's been around for a while, creates beautiful materials, including slide presentations, and they've brought in a lot of AI since the beginning. At the announcement for Copilot being built into Office 365, Microsoft 365, and PowerPoint, for example, is where you'll be able to, within your desktop applications more and more, it's a desktop application, but it's happening via cloud, but you know what I mean? These common applications like PowerPoint will have it built in, where you can just kind of give it some prompting and say, let's build this together. Let's see what you create. And then you can do that, editing and tweaking either through conversation, or you can do some things manually. And then there you go, your workflow is going to be that much quicker. Okay. Mohammed, I'm not sure about gamma and hallucinations. I haven't tested that, to be honest. I found if you're going to give it something simple like the tasks that we focused on for electoral college or sensation and perception, that it's going to be able to break that topic down very quickly and accurately into those slide chunks and their content chunks. Where you'll find hallucinations often is if you're asking for, research articles and things like that, it will pretend to know an article or a fact about a research study. You have to be really careful about some of those hallucinations. Okay, let me check on time. I want to get through maybe one more section here and then do a little sandbox if we could. So talking about assessment and feedback. A lot, and here again comes a large prompt at you, but this will get a good result here. So you're an expert instructor and registered nurse practitioner. Let's talk about case studies. I should give you context. So there were requests for authentic learning or authentic assessment, experiential learning. So I'm going to kind of combine those into one example here. So let's talk about case studies. Case studies are great experiences for students in certain disciplines, and it gets them to really think about applying prior knowledge, doing analysis, and coming up with reports and results, and then seeing how that stands and how that's assessed. It gets them ready for the real experience. It gets them to practice things, to diagnose and things like that. So those can take a lot of time to create. There are a lot of examples that are out there, some free online, some are paid for, some are better than others, but you can actually use prompting like this to start creating some really effective case studies. And I remember even back in March, I did this for a medical university, and just on the fly, we tried to do it, and it created a great case study where they validated, as the experts in the field, they were able to validate it. I just said, what do you think? Let's do it. All right. So without reading all this prompt, you can see what I put in here to give it very clear parameters. Hypothetical yet realistic healthcare scenarios require students to apply critical thinking, clinical reasoning related to their capstone experience. You'll create instructions. Students create and submit a 2-page report. It's worth 50 points, 20 weighted on how well they analyze and diagnose, 20 on their recommended treatment or course of action, 10 on quality of the report. Create a rubric. Now, rubrics, that's another one that was requested, and rubrics take a lot of time to develop effectively. ChatGPT can do it well, but it's very tricky to prompt it to do it because it's complex to set up tables and tell how to set up tables. So I'm trying to model here for you how you can do that effectively, and you'll see the output in just a moment. So I've got 3 levels of criteria. I've said, give me a description for each of these levels and for each of these elements. Also give me the point distribution for these. Let's see what you create. Take your time and think about it. This is very important for students to assess their readiness. Okay, so let's go to the chat log. Great, I see some hallucination definition. Thank you for helping with that, Laura and others. Okay, so there's that prompt again, and now let's look at it in action. So here come the assignment instructions, advanced clinical case studies for nursing students. There's an objective. There's the assignment overview. And now the report structure. The evaluation criteria, which I gave it, these 3 areas, and the point weights. And now the way I described it in the prompt up above, if you were to model that, you'll be able to get a really effective rubric table. Because a rubric table should include the criteria. It should then include the levels of performance for the criteria and a description within each of those levels, not just the points. That's not a rubric, that's a scoring scale. You really want to be able to lead them toward the best performance by telling them what you expect. And then if you were to grade them as a 3 on analysis and diagnosis, there would be a basis for that, and you would be able to have your feedback related to that. And I've even in other examples said, give me feedback statements for each of these levels of performance, and it does that really well. And so you can add those feedback statements, and I told it to do constructive ones and positive ones as well. Okay, so here are the case studies: myocardial infarction, appendicitis, ectopic pregnancy. There's a little bit of description, but then what I've said is that's great, but let's have you do that again, except provide more detail in each of the 3 case study scenarios. So it went back and it did provide a little bit more detail. Okay, and again, you as the expert in this context can decide what is enough or too much. I felt like it needed more, but it's certainly not my area of expertise, specifically for nursing. Okay, so then they've got the assignment to analyze the provided case study scenarios, focus on the patient's presentation, medical history, and additional information. They then decide what the diagnosis and course of action is and write that up and put that into the report. And then that can be analyzed by you, the expert. You can also have, these done as groups, or you can do peer feedback. So different ways that you can implement this. But this is how you can create case studies pretty quickly by giving it a prompt like this and applying your context and then tweaking some of these points parameters or rubric parameters, but being able to get all of that pretty quickly in a matter of minutes. That was all produced. I like what Chris is saying, asking ChatGPT to take it step by step. Yeah. That's another great way of saying, take your time, think about it, take all of 2 minutes if you want, instead of 30 seconds. Funny that we're at that stage. Okay, creating exam questions. There were requests for that, creating exam questions, quiz questions. I'm one who strongly believes in many different types of assessments, so I'm not promoting that you should go all in on exams and multiple choice exams and things like that, but they do play a role, particularly in some courses, particularly if they're related to certification levels and discipline standards and things like that. So here's where I've created that Mad Lib type prompt for you, where you can be able to just put in the parameters for course, the chapter title, or link to the chapter, and then put in the number of questions, the balance you want of true, false, multiple choice, multiple response. If you want fill in the blank, it does that as well, but I put this as a pretty common example. Okay. I had to say, remember, because it only did some of them the first time I asked. I also found a limit that if you do about 25 of these, if you ask it to create about 25 questions, that's kind of the limit. As I started doing 40, it kept stopping each time. There was a limit to how much it could output, because it's doing the questions, it's doing the 4 or 5 responses per, and it's doing the answer for the answer key. So there's a lot of information that it's producing, and there's a limitation on to what you can get from each prompt. So I did an example here. Oops, let me go to the chat log for this one, for a sociology quiz example. So there's that same prompt where I've put in my parameters, 20 question quiz on this chapter. I want 10 of these multiple choice, 5 to be multiple response, 5 to be true false. So here's what I got. And this probably took about 90 seconds because there's a lot that it's creating here, all of these lines. It's giving me the answer key. So I've got a lot of good information that I can work with. And of course, I would analyze these questions, consider them effective or not, and then be able to copy and paste them. There is a way, and I started to go down this path, sort of a rabbit hole, where you can take these quiz questions. You can actually create a very, very detailed prompt. There's a 10-minute video out there on it, and I went through it and worked it out. And I thought, I don't think 1% of the people who are watching this are going to follow and go down that path that deeply, because you can prompt it as such to put all of this into a very scripted table. Column A has this, column B is blank, column C has this, D, E, F, E, H, I, all the way to J. And if you prompt that accordingly, you can then have it export it as a CSV file or an XLS file. Then you would have to take that and use an app to then have it turned into a QTI file. Then you could bring it into Canvas, import it into Canvas. I wasn't going to cover all of that. To me, that was exhaustive. I could see if you're doing quiz after quiz after quiz, and you could set that up as a good workflow. that would have a return on all that work invested, but it was highly technical and had multiple stages. So I'm not going to cover that today, but it is possible to do, again, the XLS export and the QTI conversion into Canvas or LMS. So look that up if you're curious, and that would benefit you, but I figured that would be a very small bandwidth of this group. It's a bit crazy. Okay, so here's the output. It does that well, and I've got the answers there. All right, back to chat. You've got that example there that you can plug in for presentation assignment. So this is one that I've used, but here's a prompt that you could do to help develop a presentation assignment for students. And then it also goes so far as to then asking ChatGPT to create the instructions, create the detailed rubric, positive constructive feedback, peer review form. Some of you did ask for how to use it to assess and enable feedback. So this has some examples there for you. Since it's a quarter till, and I did show this in a prior webinar a bit ago, I'm going to let folks access this and go into the rubric prompting if they want to look at that, and the positive and constructive feedback elements that can be used, and the peer review form, which is another one that I mentioned a moment ago. That's another good resource. Okay. So creating educational materials, just real quick on that. So one thing I started working with is now there are more plugins that are available. There's the ChatGPT plugin store, and I haven't dove deeply into that. I've been following about a little bit, but for this presentation, I thought, okay, I always like to create visual representations of complex ideas and have students be able to look at it as text-based or visual-based or back and forth. And there are different advantages for different learners, and also I'm always thinking of UDL and accessibility. So ChatGPT prompt is, I basically said, give me a detailed description of chemical reaction types. It did that in a text format, very organized outline. And then I was able to, with the whimsical plugin that I enabled, I was able to say, okay, now create me a visual concept map of that. And it did that in about 60 seconds. So I can go ahead and go to ChatGPT. Let's see, let me back out here, go to live. And let's see, chemical reactions. Let me close the sidebar, give you a little bit more room, and we'll start at the top. So there's that simple prompt. This one was pretty straightforward. I just wanted an outline of the chemical reaction types. Not my area of expertise. So, if it was, I would be checking for accuracy, as you always should. But I'm just propping up an example here. And then if I wanted students to be able to visualize these as clusters, if I wanted them to look at a concept map or flowchart of different ideas, then I can do that. Like for accounting, if I wanted them to see a workflow of an accounting process, I can put that into a visual, because that helps to have multiple modalities for students. So with more plugins like this, and also if you followed some of Sam Altman's recent conversation, great conversation with Bill Gates in the last week, there's just going to be more and more of this that's coming into one platform, whether it be ChatGPT and others. It's going to be multimodality. It's going to be voice to text to image to whatever it needs to be pretty quickly, without a lot of bridging between apps and internal and external apps. Okay, let me take us quickly, hopefully, to a Padlet where, here I've just put it into a slide where you can see the outline, and I put it in a slide where you can see the resulting visual output there. All right, so with the QR code, if that works for you, or with the link that we've got coming into chat for you, if you could jump to Padlet, then you can help give me a sense of what's on your mind as far as any other techniques you'd like to explore or discuss briefly. Okay, let me find chat on my screen. There we go. And I appreciate the side conversation taking place. Catch up on that. And let's jump into, and if you haven't figured out already, just use the vote up icon for things that you're more curious about discussing or diving into with any time left. There's no reason to vote down on anything. I don't think anybody's done that yet, so that's good. And then that parking lot over to the right, any other ideas of interest? We may not get to it today, but it may be something that can be covered in the near future. Okay, let's see. All right. And I'll probably just for time purposes, I'll just comment on these because we're going to go in another section here in a minute, but I can certainly use these to help do a follow-up. Yeah, getting feedback on course materials. You can upload documents. I'm using Chat GPT primarily today, but Bard and other things where you can upload documents and have those analyzed. You can give it a prompt to do a particular analysis, and it does that well, whether it's a summary or a suggestion or things like that. I see that comment. And I see a request for using grading rubrics to actually have generative AI implement those and grade things for you. You can right now, it's more of a labored process where you would be uploading and getting the analysis, doing the results. It can make some things happen more quickly, but there is that hand-holding workflow that's going to get better as far as being able to batch analyze, let's say student submissions and have it graded according to a rubric. That's going to get better real soon. So that's something I want to explore more. Let's see. Directories with headshots and birth dates. Non-instructional uses. I'm always open to those. I did one recently on creating letters of recommendation that's been really popular. So we have a post on that where I gave a prompt and also an intake form and the whole process where you can draft those letters of recommendation. There's a lot of great stuff here to cover. Okay, so how to ensure that learner time is not exceeded in terms of content, activities, assignments, etc. So that's a good one we won't cover today, but I've actually, in one of my examples for psychology, that 14-week, and I created a module on sensation and perception. I had ChatGPT analyze the length of time it would likely take students to complete that module. And it went through and analyzed the sources that, the chapter, the article, the video length, the activity time, the assessment, and then it gave me a range of time that it would take for students, and it fell right about at that time limit that I wanted. It said 6 to 12 hours when I was shooting for 9 hours at a 3-to-1 ratio of, in-person versus online independent work. People have different ratios, but that's the most common. So it can really gauge workload if that's what you're getting at in terms of learner time really well, which is important, and that's a good enabler for faculty because it takes a lot of time to analyze that effectively. Okay, so I'm going to, for time purposes, jump from here, take these ideas, process them, figure out a way where I can maybe go from Padlet to ChatGPT, but I'm going to take these and process them and try and figure out what next steps are for an upcoming presentation. I'm going to take us back here. Go into slideshow. And one next step is in February, we'll have announcements, you'll get them automatically, is we're going to talk about Gen AI for research and scholarship. Some that ChatGPT can do, but some tools like Research Rabbit, Perplexity AI, and other things that you see on here, and how it can enable your research activities and your scholarly output as part of your workflow for those of you that are not just teaching, but also doing research, scholarship, and other activities. And you can see some of the types of things that we'll cover in that session. It'll be different tools that will need to be used for different steps. It'll be a little complex in some ways, but anyway, we'll talk about research because that's a big one. Okay, so now what I want to talk about is with Gen AI, obviously these things could be complex. It takes that amount of time and skill to think about prompting, think about lining it all up. What are the key elements of information that need to be in those prompts? And then what are the key aspects of learning science to make that happen most effectively? to make it most powerful and aligned to what we know about effective teaching and learning. So what we've been doing at Alchemy is we've been creating these optimizer resources, and we started doing this before Gen AI. And these were tools, templates, and wizards, if you will, that instructors could go in and they could fill out fields, and then it would create a resource as an output based on the fields that they've created. And it would say, okay, now you can implement this, and here are the best ways to do it. But of course, now we've been making Gen AI an optional feature within these resources so that we've got the prompts, the fields, the Gen AI, and the learning science all baked in, so that in a matter of 30 seconds to a minute, you'd be able to create a short form and get an output that would be a resource. Let's go ahead and dive into our platform. You would be able to create a profile as a user, and we'll have premium access for everybody that we'll be able to share through this distribution list, where you'll be able to go in and use these optimizers that we're displaying here. And we've got optimizers on many different topics. And so if I go through what we call Discover, which is where you're going to go and look for resources, then we go for, let's say, a group project activity. Developing a group project assignment is one example. So I did a search for develop a group project assignment, and I'm able to look at the results here. And I can click on this one, which is one of our optimizers. And this is where you've got one or more screens where you've got prompts and a little bit of context and even some examples in the grayed out boxes, where that'll guide you to then giving some information to help you develop a resource rapidly. And so if you wanted to, you could turn on Gen AI and be able to just put in responses here. So let's say demonstrate the properties of ionic versus covalent bonds. Let's say groups of 4. Let's do random. And let's see, the roles of each person in the group will play and how that will enable their efforts. And let's say a written project statement. Now, if I click go, it will rapidly create the example for me. And then I get this worksheet that I could then export and be able to use, or this project guide that I could export and be able to use. And as I export it, I could make any tweaks to it, and then I'd be able to put it into the learning management system. Or if it's something that I'm creating that I'm distributing to students, I can do that as well. We've got them for many different topics. Let me go back to Discover. And we've got over 70 of these optimizers developed. And we've got more and more of them where we're doing what's called accelerated versions, where we've got that Gen AI toggle. And we have it as a toggle because we realize not every instructor wants to put AI in every task that they do. So they can choose to turn it on, or they can choose to do things more manually. Let's say if it's a smaller type of task and they want to have complete control over the input and output, then that can be done as well. So that's a little bit about our Curie platform with our portfolio that you can develop of your optimizers and resources that you would work with. There's a sharing platform for those that want to share resources and share collections of resources. And of course, there's this discover aspect where you can go in and find things according to your keyword search and then be able to find aligned resources. We have categories that are very common here: inclusive teaching, developing learning activities, creating media. We have these media optimizers where you can put in elements that we'll ask you for, and then it'll create a script, and then that can actually create a video for you fairly quickly. So we're trying to put all of this into this platform and workflow that you can use, and then you'll be able to bridge a lot of these resources into your learning management system in the near future. So I'll pause there. We're also bringing in OER content, OpenStax, and others as well, and other resources we've developed or that we've brought in that are open access resources. But I'll pause given time and see if there are any questions related to the Curie platform, our Discover process, and these optimizers. Let me stop share, and I'll go back to the slides actually. Okay, so we'll get you access to Curie and those optimizers, premium access, so you have access to a certain number of them over a certain period of time. If you're interested in more about our AI efforts, our webinar series, we've got the link to the playlist there. The collated AI resources that we've developed that also have come through other presenters that have worked with me and others in Alchemy, and also even attendees who contributed resources. We've been collating those into a website that we've created. And then as far as following and finding the things that we're doing continually, we'll be sharing out with you. And then I just want to thank everybody here before the end of the session. And I'm going to get back to chat and hang in there and see if anything else that I can answer in given time or time that we've run out of. But again, thank you for your participation. Hopefully this has been helpful. I will analyze the Padlet and your responses, and then we will do our research session in February and look for other ways that we can help with ideas for you to use Gen AI. So thank you.